2018 has come and gone. While there wasn't as many animated films as last year, it was overall a much better year quality-wise, with barely any real stinkers out there, from superheroes dimension hopping to Dracula going on a cruise. This year had a dozen or so animated films for me to rank. Usual rules apply here, so no direct-to-DVD products, no anime, nor any movies that I missed in theaters. Sorry, Isle of Dogs, you didn't doggy paddle to my list this year. With that, we have exactly 10 animated films to go over this time. There was supposed to be more, but some of them, like Gnome Alone and Duck Duck Goose, got pulled from theaters and went to Netflix instead for various distribution problems or companies just backing out. So, here we go for the top 5 worst animated movies of 2018. No dishonorable mentions this year, but the first movie on the worst list will rile up a lot of people. Oh, I can see the torches from here. Pixar's The Incredibles 2 lands at the bottom of the list. While it is a good film, it suffers the same problems as one of Pixar's prettiest films, Finding Dory. It follows too much of the same beats as the first film to really stand out. It's essentially the same plot of a superhero parent ignoring their family to live out their dream in a world where superheroes are outcasts, leaving the other parents and children with barely any character arcs nor screen time, focusing mainly on the main super and their exploits. It's basically a gentler bent version of the first movie. The villain was rather bland and yet another Disney twist villain that does not help matters, since it lacks the interest we had with the first film's villain syndrome, where we had a clear motivation from beginning to end, a clear arc from fanboy to demented villain wanting to improve himself. Screensaver is as basic as a villain can be in these recent Disney movies, unfortunately. It's just, they're evil out of nowhere. Its glorious animation and voice acting are the only things keeping this film from being higher on the list. Next, we have Smallfoot from Warner Brothers. Sony Animation. Sony Animation paid by Warner Brothers to be as lazy as possible for these theatrical movies. You can tell this is Sony from the eyes alone. It's right out of Hotel Transylvania. But this film is honestly average. It's about a Yeti finding a Smallfoot, well, a human, and trying to prove to his clan, who feels that anything from the outside world would ruin their civilization, and there are no such things as Smallfoots. I honestly do not remember much from this film, aside from some of the side characters that help out the main character. It is a bad thing when the side characters make more of an impression than the main characters. If I were to compare this to another film, it would honestly be Happy Feet, since it deals with a similar plot of a unique snowflake in a clan of normal people who believe in the old ways, trying to prove there is much more outside of their village and beliefs, and hoping to change their minds by the time the credits roll. It's a good movie for kids, but just stay away from it and just watch something else like the Lego movies. For our third pick of the list, Sgt Stubby, the only indie film on this list. This film comes to us from the folks who animated last year's Captain Underpants, Micros Animation for Montreal, Canada. The movie is a loose retelling of the adventures of the real-life Sgt Stubby, a dog who detected mines and other potential threats during World War I. The story does tend to do some changes to make it more kid-friendly, but overall, it is a pretty okay film, yet forgettable, sadly. A cute dog, some okay animation, and bland writing is just not enough to convince folks to go see Sgt Stubby anytime soon. I would wait for it to be on Netflix. Our second pick, Early Man, is a visually pleasing film from Hardman Studios. But don't get me wrong, there are some positives to the film, like the stop motion animation being as grand as ever with the help of some CGI sets. But the biggest problem with Early Man, it is that it has a rather bland story. Imagine all the sports films from the 1980s and 1990s, merge them all together with the Flintstones, the Croods, and stop motion animation, and you'll get this very cookie cutter film. Early Man plays it off too safe, and it ended up being one of the most forgotten animated films that Harmon ever released. And quite honestly, I just don't see them going back up, considering that they have yet another sequel coming up next year that has to do with Shaun the Sheep. I just hope that they learn to pick up and do some more original stuff. Before we get to our worst animated film from 2018, I would like to quickly mention my top 5 worst live action films. It will begin flashing on the screen. I ended up seeing more live action films than animated films this year, so I felt I should include these here rather than give it its own video, so be sure to look it over and see if there's any that match your list. Be sure to list it in the comments below. I'll be sure to read it. Our top worst animated film of the year is, not surprisingly, Sherlock Gnomes. No real surprise there. It is the most out there sequel. As I recall, there was not much demand for a sequel to a Disney released film that had an Elton John soundtrack. No, not that one. That's for another time. This isn't a film that truly showed up out of nowhere, like a bad Johnny Depp film that gets forgotten as soon as a Tim Burton or Pirates project comes along. Oh, did I mention how bland and forced in Johnny Depp's performance was in this film? You could tell he had no passion behind the mic. Most of the bland characters from the first film are back and still bickering at each other over misunderstandings like the last film. It is a shame a yellow demonic mascot is the only highlight of this movie. His animation is simply wasted in such a forgettable film. Get these talented animators to work on something else. Oh wait, they are. They're doing another Asterix movie and deferred SpongeBob movie, so good for them. Oh, and the little bits of hand-drawn animation is just too stunning for such a forgettable project. Do yourself a favor, just stick to the first movie if you truly need your fix of British garden gnomes.